This video is going to review the process for adding an Orton effect to an image with the use of luminosity masks. Start out by reminding you that you can download a free action to do this whole process with a little less flexibility, because the action will end up with your two layers grouped and only opacity adjustments have to be made to the grouped layer. I'm going to show you the process you would do if you were following elements, especially if you were below elements 15. But my preference really is to use this method even if you're using Photoshop CC. I think it gives you more flexibility not to group the layers at the end. Just changes the directions a little, and I have a tutorial that goes over all the steps that I'm showing in this video. So I'm going to begin going up to the section that is on the Orton Effect, and in the folder I have an image called Tony Kuiper Orton Effect. This is the image on his blog site that he does this activity with. I thought we would use it here. So this is how it starts out. And we need to create a selection for lights 1, and we're going to save the selection. If you don't know how to do that, then here's a chance to learn. So go to the action panel and go under the TK selections to lights 1 and play that selection over the image. It's highlighting anything that is brighter than average on that image. And then we're going to go up to the select menu at the top, pop it open, come down to the bottom where you see Save Selection, click on it, and type a name for it. I'm going to put Lights 1 Orton Effect. Okay? And then once you've saved it, let's deselect. That can be done from Select, Deselect, or Command or Control D on the keyboard. So we've saved it so we can use it later, but we don't want it right now. So we're now going to open an adjustment layer for levels. And then we are going to change the mode of this layer up there where it says normal. We're going to change it to screen, which is one of the lighten things, and you will see it really does lighten the image. We're now going to take and create a new composite pixel layer that will be on top of this layer we've just created. And they call this stamp visible. That's the terminology in Adobe software. And the directions are given in the written part. It's a whole bunch of keys that you place down so that I will hold them down on my computer and create that layer. And I'm going to name that for the purpose of our looking at it and just call it Stamp Visible. And my written thing tells you the keys that you hold down. What it's doing is giving me a new background layer with pixels on it, but it accepts the changes that were before and gives us a new starting point. This is useful if you've been working on an image and you have a lot of layers and you all of a sudden want to do something and apply it to the entire image. If you create this, what I call is a composite layer, a stamp visible layer, it has all the changes you've made so far, and it kind of gives you a fresh starting point. Now, I do have to remind you that whenever you do this, you're going to double the size of the file because you have a double of the background. But anytime you copy the background, you do double the file size. But for this case, it's an important thing to do. So to this stamp visible layer, we're going to add a Gaussian blur, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and he says to make it 30 for this one. So be sure your number of radius is 30, then accept it by saying OK. And now we're going to change the blend mode of this layer to multiply. So where it says normal on this layer, come down to multiply, which will darken it back. So what we've created here is a layer where the blur has been applied, and we want to limit some of these effects just to the lighter pixels, not to all of them. So this is what we're going to do. We're not going to create a group, which is one of the things that's given in my tutorial. We're going to follow the elements directions. We're going to come down to levels 1. We're going to select the mask, and we're going to delete that mask. And to delete it, you go up to the layer menu. You come down till it says layer mask, and over to the right, you'll see the word delete. This removes the mask without affecting anything else. And we're doing that because we want to add masks that reflect the levels 1 selection. And so we're going to go up to the select menu and see where it says load selection. You're going to get back this selection we saved. Load selection, lights 1, Orton Effect, and click OK. And with that selection in effect, we're going to add a layer mask to the levels 1 layer. Remember, we deleted it, and now we're adding a fresh one that has a selection on it. And the way you add a mask is to go to the tools available on the layers palette and find the one that's a rectangle with a grayed out circle in the middle, and it says add layer mask. And when you do that, the layer mask includes the selection that you had set. Now go up to the stamp visible layer, make it active. We want to do the same thing here, so we must reload the selection. So go to select, load selection, and you want to go and choose Lights 1 Orton Effect as the selection you're going to load. Say OK. And once it's loaded, you're going to add a mask to the stamp visible layer. So click on Add a Layer Mask. And you have created at this point the effect, but you're now going to choose the opacity slider to play around with it. This is the Orton Effect. What it is that a blur has been added to the lightest part of the image and leaving the dark part of the images unaffected. If you want to see what this does, let's go back to the original background, and let's use the Alt-Option key and click on the mask. Here's your thing. Now notice when you bring it back, it's the brights that get the blur. And that's what we did back in the days when we used to sandwich 2 slides together and project them as doubles. Incidentally, the section of the Tony Kuiper blog that talks about the Orton Effect goes into some detail explaining about the old Orton Effect that we did with slides. This is an attempt to duplicate it digitally. So with this done, you may now play with the opacity slider. So let's try that blurred layer, the stamp visible layer, and let's go to the opacity slider, reduce it. See how you're bringing back the sharpness in the bright part of the image? So if you decided you wanted less of that effect, you could dial it back with the opacity slider. Now go back to the levels 1 section, and that's the section where we generally lightened everything in the image. Apply the opacity slider to it, and notice that you're darkening the entire image. So that one affects the entire, well, it doesn't affect the entire image, it affects, again, the lights. But you can darken those lights if you think they're too light. And why might that be? Well, if you chose an image where you had a lot brighter tones than the leaves are here, you might end up feeling they're too light. And if they are, the section that was the screen mode, which lightened it, it's now only going to change the lights in the image. If you lower the opacity, you can get rid of some of that brightness that you added. So you've got 2 opportunities here to vary the outcome. And if you follow the directions I gave you for Photoshop CC, you will be grouping those layers, and when you do the opacity slider, you'll only do one thing to both. You can't work on each one separately. I prefer to leave the grouping off and have control over each layer separately. So this is the Orton Effect. At this point, I'd like to add a little information that Tony Kuiper has provided an action which will do everything that we just did by steps. And he's providing it without charge. And to get it, go to the blog post that I've given you for the Orton Effect, scroll to the bottom of that post, and you'll find a link to download the action. It can be installed in the action panel of either Elements or Photoshop, and then it's there available to you. When it is applied, it leaves your image with that layer grouped, but you can just click on the little triangle and open the layer, and now you can apply the options to each layer in that group separately.